So this past week was real interesting. Not in a good interesting way, an educational interesting way, but not in a good way. Um, so George Floyd was killed by Derek Chauvin, I think is his name, and I think as Tack was saying earlier, the official medical examiner cause of death was finally released, and it was actually heart attack. And of course, I don't know anyone who can genuinely say that they think that the heart attack had nothing to do with the stressful situation in which he was placed. But yeah, not direct asphyxiation, but rather his heart gave out trying to pump oxygen in that stressful situation. And it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. The guy was probably guilty of passing off a $20 counterfeit bill. Although I don't know how long you've been alive in the world, but it's completely possible for anybody to get a hold of a $20 counterfeit bill by accident. I mean, so it's entirely possible that he didn't even realize he was paying with a $20 counterfeit bill, but it's also completely possible that he knew exactly what he was doing. Maybe some more information about that will come out, but I don't think that exonerates the officer from his duty to handle the guy's arrest in a normal and humane way. I mean, the point of an arrest is a civilized way to detain or acquire somebody, remove them from the situation that is being escalated or caused by their criminal activity. We're supposed to be removing them with some kind of care because we want them to survive. We want them to be rehabilitated by a criminal justice system. We want people to have interactions with courts instead of resorting to vigilante justice. So when the system denies a person an opportunity for a meaningful adjudication of their claim, due process of law, literally the Fifth Amendment and 14th Amendments, due process of law. When the system denies that to a person in a particularly violent way, where is the justice? The justice is part of the glue that holds society together. We need to have a healthier outlet. Like, I understand nobody wants to go to court, nobody wants to be charged with something, but we need to have a healthy outlet as a civilization, as a society, as opposed to dueling, as opposed to fighting, as opposed to war. We need to have an alternative, a healthy alternative. So you need to be able to count on the police to stop at a threshold, and that threshold would be basically reasonable force. They should only be allowed to use force that is necessary to detain the person, and no more force than that. And when taking somebody into custody, you should have custody, you should have control, you should have care for someone who is in your custody. And if someone needs medical attention, you get them medical attention. Do people ask for medical attention who don't need it? Yes, but would you ever want to be on the wrong side of that one, where someone asked for medical attention, you didn't give it, and they needed it? Well, here's what happens. The man literally said, "I can't breathe." Well, maybe he didn't need medical attention. Well, I'll tell you what, breathing is a medical necessity. So it's not like he was saying, "Oh, I can't eat." Yeah, well, for that moment in time, you could probably get away with him not eating. You could probably get away with him not drinking. You could probably get away with a lot of stuff, but the man needs to breathe. It's a real basic thing. I mean, it's a real basic human thing. There really is no excuse for anyone to deny a human being of their ability to breathe and then try to pass it off as, "Oh, I didn't realize that I was something, or I didn't mean to," or something. I don't even know what this officer's excuse will be. I don't even think he's made a statement like that, which is smart. Um, the officer should exercise their right to remain silent and their right against self-incrimination, because, I mean, look, there's enough evidence out there already. What help can the officer do? There's absolutely nothing the officer can do to help their case at this point. I thought it was interesting how quickly the police arrested others, but how slowly the police officer who on video committed an 8+ minute act of violence and it took 4+ days to charge. Meanwhile, I think a CNN crew of reporters with a camera and a tripod and a microphone and credentials, they were arrested before Derek Chauvin was arrested. So, reporters covering the protests were arrested before the officer who caused the incident that caused the protests was arrested. That was kind of telling about the landscape. When people say we live in two Americas, and one America for whoever them is, and one America for whoever us is. It really is. There really are two Americas, and the George Floyds of the world live in one America, and the police live in a completely different America with a different set of standards, a different set of rules, a different application of those rules, a different set of people who will come to fight for them when there's a problem or an issue. So a whole different support system than George Floyd probably ever had. I don't want to speak for him. I don't know the man. I don't know his history. I didn't really learn a whole lot more about him over the weekend. But I'm going to guess that the officer has had opportunities that George Floyd has not had. It's a completely different experience. So when I went to my local protest last night, which was entirely peaceful in my area in Allentown, and that's not to say that there weren't violent protests elsewhere, and that's not to avoid condemning violent protests. The violence, let's separate it into categories. Person on person violence is absolutely unnecessary, unforgivable, and in fact, we see a lot of police person to person violence. The police seem to be ready to initiate if. So I'm sure it's a matter of perspective, right? So the police feel like they have to defend themselves, so they're going to defend themselves with the amount of force they think is necessary. Whereas, of course, others are going to look and see, well, we only threw a rock at that officer, so why is he shooting us with a beanbag round from a shotgun or something? And then everything in between. Lots of officers who have committed violent acts without provocation. And then there's also lots of protesters who have committed violent acts without provocation. But this is all because we haven't, as a society, provided an outlet, not just an outlet, but a meaningful redress of these grievances. No politician is out there making this situation better before it happens. I'm sure there are lots of politicians who are trying to keep and maintain a healthy situation. That's not what I'm talking about. But I mean that no one was out there training Derek Chauvin not to do this before it happened. Now maybe someone will get some training, but no one taught him not to do it, is all I'm saying. And I mean, this is the preventative maintenance of society. If your preventative maintenance plan works well, is an effective preventative maintenance plan, then you probably, no one ever knows you did anything. No one ever knows you accomplished anything. You could have the world's best preventative maintenance plan. And, look at SpaceX, for example. SpaceX, you need rockets to go up 100% of the time. You need them to not blow up with people in them 100% of the time. That's a big thing. So they do all that maintenance. They do all that preventative. They take all those preventative measures. They put systems in place, checks and balances, Six Sigma, that kind of thing. It's not Six Sigma, but it's the same kind of thing. It's error checking along the way. And you do that, and you get a much higher chance of a perfect launch. Well, how many rocket launches do we watch? I mean, I watched SpaceX's last night because it's the first time in years that the United States has sent United States people to space on a United States vehicle launched from the United States. It was a big deal. We've been sending humans to space, but it's been through other launch vehicles, Russian launch vehicles, which is fine. But, it's a big deal when your country gets back into the game. So when you do it right, it looks like you didn't do anything at all. It just looks like a bunch of scientists sent up a rocket. And many people do not realize how much went into that to prevent any problems from occurring. Um, for everything to go 100% perfectly was a tremendous accomplishment. Well, the same thing happens with society. And so if you don't prevent a Derek Chauvin situation, what is the backstop? What is the thing that prevents a Derek Chauvin from becoming nationwide protests? And then, of course, what prevents nationwide protests from becoming violence and looting and all that? I mean, I think on one hand, I think the looters are a different set of people than the protesters. And I think we need to acknowledge that. And I'm skipping over any conspiracy theories about the looters being, inciters, people from outside the various areas that see an opportunity to take advantage of the chaos created by protesting. So, in other words, massive protests. So, let's say everybody knows Friday night or Saturday night at 6 p.m., there's going to be a massive protest in downtown. The police are going to be really occupied. So, if I'm an opportunist, maybe I don't have a care in the world about the protests. Maybe I just want the distraction, because now that there's a distraction, I can go in and break into something or do something that criminal that I couldn't get away with before. Looting is a big, easy one because it's just smash and grab, and where the police going to be? The police are going to be with the protesters, not necessarily where some opportunistic looting happened. I'm assuming that the police can eventually show up, but they're also going to have their forces divided. So I don't know that they're necessarily the same people. I think we need to acknowledge that. It's definitely wrong, but I don't think that it needs to detract from the Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd by holding him down by his neck with a knee to his neck for 8 minutes. I don't think it needs to distract from that. And then sort of the last question that I just sort of want to finish on is, why protest? I've heard some fairly ignorant comments, and I don't mean ignorant as in, this is a sort of reasonable level of ignorance for some people to have. And of course, from other perspectives, it's not going to seem reasonable at all. But there's a lot of people out there who are like, well, what's the point of protesting? Like, you're just shouting at empty buildings on a Saturday night. You're forcing the police to patrol and protect and all that. You're forcing emergency crews to be prepared, both on standby and on patrol. For other efforts, and then of course the looting and stuff, damaging your own city and things. But you got to back up from that, because the looters are not the same as the protesters. There's definitely some overlap in the Venn diagram, but it's more like this level of overlap, and not like two circles are on top of one another. There's a little bit of an overlap, but not much. But what outlet do people have? What way to redress grievances has society given people? When people see Derek Chauvin kill George Floyd, what is a better outlet? There isn't one. There's no connection that society has given people. No politician has said, to prevent Derek Chauvin killing George Floyd, click here or call this number and tell us, please don't kill George Floyd. No one has given us that outlet. No one has given people, the tax-paying people, the ability to stop police officers from overstepping. Instead, you saw the crowd of people around Derek Chauvin and George Floyd helplessly filming, reporting for the future. None of them could physically step in to save George Floyd, while a police officer mercilessly kills him in front of a whole crowd. So what did you expect? What did society if you can even like look society in the eyes and be like, society, we're going to hold you to take you to task as if you are one entity, which is ridiculous. But what did society at large expect? If it doesn't control an officer, if it doesn't train an officer, if it doesn't give the people a voice that means something, well, the protests are not just in response to one Derek Chauvin and one George Floyd. There are dozens to hundreds of these cases every year. I've got like a hair in my eye, sorry. Like I have, my dogs don't live with me anymore, but I still live with my dogs, if you know what I mean. Like I'm always getting hair in my eye or whatever. Yeah. So George Floyd didn't have a chance, wasn't given a chance by Derek Chauvin. The crowd wasn't allowed to step in and protect Derek. There's no in between police and protesters. There seems to be no spectrum, when instead we need a spectrum. In fact, that's where the meaning is going to be found, is in the spectrum between killing George Floyd and, never arresting anybody. There obviously has to be a level of service, protect and serve in there that does involve arresting people, but involves not hurting them any more than is reasonably necessary in the process. Yeah, so those are my thoughts on that. And I guess I don't have much of a well thought out point so much as a rant of what I've seen in the past few days. These are, there were people out at the protests here. Let me pull up. I won't play much of the protest, but here is some of the protests. Not this in the bottom right. This is my father. We just hung a bee feeder. It's like a little bee house. But here are some pictures of the protests. There were people who were dressed up. I don't have any good pictures of people who were dressed up. Most people are in plain clothes, but I definitely saw some people who were like completely dressed up, like it was a night out on the town. And then there's police officers doing their job. They're not bothering anybody. It was otherwise relatively quiet. Let's see, I'll try to get to some stills maybe. But here's Allentown, far removed from Minnesota and Derek Chauvin, and still feeling it just as strongly. In fact, the protests made it up to my house too. But yeah, like this is a concern that people have, because not just does George Floyd not deserve, or to deserve to not be treated this way. I mean, it's basically a situation, there but for the grace of God go you or I. Now, I'm not saying that you or I are going to pay for cigarettes with a counterfeit $20 bill, but really that's not that far removed from reality. As I said in the beginning, like it's perfectly plausible for any one of us to receive a counterfeit $20 bill and not realize that we're paying. I mean, if you check your money, sure, you probably can figure it out pretty quick. But I mean, look, give me this one. It is possible for someone to pay with a counterfeit $20 bill. So really, any one of us could have ended up in Derek Chauvin's hands or under Derek Chauvin's knee. And there's obviously racial reasons why we think that people of color are being targeted more by the Derek Chauvins of the world than others, and that's absolutely unacceptable too. So let's come together and remember that society exists for everyone, that society exists to avoid the anarchy that we see in not the protests, but rather when the protests get out of control. And again, I think the protests don't get out of control. It's not the protests that get out of control. It's opportunists, I think, take advantage of the chaos created by protests and then escalate protests into riots. And that's unacceptable. riots aren't going to help anybody. In between the burning down of the police station, certainly I don't condone that level of violence. The police do need to have a police station. Burning it down doesn't seem to accomplish much, but it sent one heck of a message, didn't it? Again, I don't condone it, but I understand. Yes, I did see videos of people in black combat gear busting windows while protesters tried to stop them. But that's all I have to say about that.